Finally got around to making the Death Note video. It only took about 7 rewrites, but we're finally here, so let's talk about it. If you've watched the show, it should come as no surprise that L and Light's characters are deeply connected story-wise, and you may have guessed that this affects their musical themes as well. What you maybe didn't guess is that they're connected on a level all the way down to their intervallic content. We're going to break down their themes and how they relate to each other, and then use that as a basis for comparing the two themes and their connections. If you're familiar with the series, and I imagine you probably are if you are watching this video, you're probably all too familiar with the harsh piano melody known as L's theme. This theme fits L perfectly, from its awkward yet methodical rhythmic structure to its mostly cold and emotionless tone. This is barring moments where he's made a big move, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Most of the piece is a steady build of the same melody. In fact, the first minute and 12 seconds are literally only this melody, building an instrumentation. This repetition for the first minute and 12 seconds is a huge factor of what makes the piece so memorable. What's really cool about this, though, is that if repetition like this is handled poorly, it becomes a major slog to listen to. L's theme avoids this, though, by not only having a well-structured and very catchy melody, but also by using an interesting rhythmic structure to constantly keep you on your toes. The melody has two variants that it switches between, one with 13 beats that feels awkward and slightly unfinished, and a second variation that adds a 14th beat or note that closes the loop that the first leaves open. This is interesting because I've listened to this theme probably hundreds of times at this point, and that switch back and forth always seems to throw me off. This is incredible, because it not only keeps the theme interesting that should by all means get boring for how long it plays, but it also shows a deeper insight into L's character. It shows off the fact that L is cold, calculating, but also a bit unstable, never stopping his work. His theme, like him, is consistent. It's a little crazy and unstable, but it is consistent and never ceasing its forward motion. That is, until we get to the big chord break sections, which represent big plays made by Light or L, a climax of the constant forward motion that we see. The main theme in the piece doesn't only offer rhythm, though. The melodic content is very important for the piece as a whole as well. The melody is simple, really simple. It takes place only within a sixth. This is smart though, because it means it's a melody that anyone could think of or hum without issue. There are no crazy hard leaps to replay in your brain, making it easy to reproduce for yourself over and over and over again. While your brain tries to close the loop, the rhythm constantly leaves open. This is incredibly smart writing, because most of the time that you get a song or any music stuck in your head, it's because your brain has a natural instinct to finish the melody or close the loop. That's why people will often tell you to listen to the song that's stuck in your head, because your brain can't finish it and will just keep repeating the music trying to find a solution. This makes L's main thematic material seem to act like a barrage of questions and has an interesting effect on the listener. That effect being that it puts you in the shoes of L, constantly thinking, constantly trying to solve these questions the music leaves open. This is one reason the music sounds so, quote-unquote, smart. It's causing you to slightly work your brain in overtime, because of that game your brain constantly plays, trying to see where the music will go. It's a constant cycle of expectation and realization or surprise. One more important thing about this specific part of the melody is that it really only outlines an E minor chord. As I said, it's very simple, but don't worry, this is actually a major factor in connecting the two pieces through their thematic content. With all that in mind, let's talk a bit about the sound design, mixing, and overall contour or structure. First of all, the amount of reverb is crazy. It's very heavy-handed, but it works well in combination with the EQ going on throughout the piece. The EQ favors the higher frequencies while cutting the lower ones out quite a bit. The effect that this has is making the music sound hollow, emotionless, cold, and calculating. At least that's true until the big chord sections, which are EQ'd a bit more evenly. This causes contrast and shows these moments of emotion or big plays as more outbursts and surprising. This matches the show as well, since we see mostly from Light's perspective, and L is much more secretive about his plans than Light is, Light sharing a good portion of his plans with Ryuk. Light's theme handles these moments very differently, which we'll see in a second. L's theme also has intelligent usage of panning. Panning basically meaning where the instruments are put if you're listening on headphones or speakers, to the left or right or center. Since the EQ is overall higher, the panning is used to give each instrument more of their own space sonically. But the piano is always square in the middle, while the guitars, which I should mention now represent Light, are often panned to one side or the other. This theme represents L perfectly, from the cold piano to the hints of chaotic genius in the chord sections. This theme doesn't just have to do with L though, but also Light and their constant game of cat and mouse. So that's as good a segue as any to talk about Light's theme. In my opinion, Light's theme isn't quite as memorable as L's theme, but tells just as much about the character and his fight with L as L's theme does for him. This piece is another very repetitive one that's easy to recreate for yourself, mainly due to the simple melody that basically only outlines a harmonic switch between outlining a D minor chord and outlining an A minor chord. This melody does have a larger interval range, but the notes that stick out all still take place within an octave, with the low notes acting mainly as notes to strengthen the harmony switches. Light's theme also has a very consistent rhythm and build, but without the tricky rhythmic stuff that we see in L's theme. This shows Light to be a calculating and intelligent character, but the fuller EQ and higher level of rhythmic consistency paint him as a consistent yet much more emotionally driven character. Driven, of course, by his personal sense of justice, which we can see is also slightly skewed in this theme, represented by the heavily affected guitar that sounds slightly like screeching. This is, or was, used fairly often in thrillers, and in my opinion is a great tool to show some mental instability. Beyond this, there are hints of piano theme, which, you guessed it, most likely represent L, his opposite. My personal favorite instrument, however, only appears a couple of times at the very end of the larger chord sections, and that's the organ. It's faint and easy to miss, but the inclusion of the organ is very cool because it most likely represents L's twisted god complex, as the organ often represents a religious undertone in most scores. A really interesting connection between the two pieces, though, is their panning. The guitar in this piece is panned off to the sides a bit, which if you remember is how the guitar is panned in L's theme. The piano is pretty much front and center as well, showing that these instruments aren't just there to sound cool, but are there to make a statement. Light and L are connected, and even necessary for each other to exist in the ways that they do. Light's and L's themes are similar in many ways, one being a similar contour or shape of the piece. It's basically a large build on one theme with sections where all tension is released. Light's theme is much more controlled though, and sounds less like it has outbursts of energy, and its overall tone is very consistent with the rest of the piece. This shows Light to be calm and collected on the outside, but flashes of intense guitar, organ, and larger sections show his true disposition. This also mirrors the show, as we are often more familiar with Light's plans than we are with L's. That means we get to see the build more closely and how the climax comes about more naturally. With some light analysis of both pieces out of the way, let's talk a bit more about how they're connected. First of all, they both return to the one of whatever chord they're playing constantly. This creates a subconscious mental association between the pieces and further strengthens the fact that they're similarly built. Alright, it's time to talk about what I'm most excited about, and that's intervallic content. I'm gonna level with you guys. I felt like I was going insane. I listened to the pieces back to back many times and I knew there was a connection between their melodies, but due to them being in different keys, when I layered them on top of each other it didn't sound right. Eventually I just bit the bullet and analyzed the intervals of each piece. Intervals, if you don't know, are basically the amount of space between notes played. I could go into detail, but that would probably take up a whole nother video. I do have a way to show this though for those that aren't familiar with intervals. I transposed L's theme and played it over Light's theme, and I'll play that and point out some similarities on my DAW in a second. If you are familiar with intervals, know that I'm going to be using simplified intervals and not compound intervals for the sake of simplicity. I'll also be including inversions since you make a subconscious connection between an interval and its inversion. I decided to go with Light's theme as my base as it has much clearer interval groups and is a better base for comparing the two themes. The first iteration of Light's theme, outlining a D minor chord, is broken up into 3 interval groups. The first interval group is minor 7th or major 2nd, minor 7th or major 2nd, then perfect 5th or perfect 4th. The second grouping is perfect 5th or perfect 4th. Perfect octave and perfect unison are in parentheses because they're technically the same pitch class, and if you're comparing the two melodies, it won't matter as much for making a mental connection. So anyways, perfect 5th or perfect 4th, perfect octave or perfect unison, and then perfect 5th or perfect 4th again. The third and final interval grouping is major 3rd or minor 6th, minor 3rd or major 6th. So what's cool is that if we look at L's theme, we can see versions of these groupings or similar versions of these groupings. L's theme, starting from the second note, shows interval group 2 without the octave. Perfect 4th or perfect 5th, perfect 4th or perfect 5th. One of those perfect 4th or perfect 5ths actually lines up at the same exact time that would be played in Light's theme. Directly after that, we see a version of the interval group on L's theme playing minor 2nd, major 7th, minor 2nd, major 7th, which is actually 1/2 step off of the original first interval group in group 1, but when you listen to it together, it sounds close enough to be connected. After that, there's an interval, and then it goes straight into a retrograde version of interval group 1. Retrograde basically means played in reverse order. And that looks like perfect 5th or perfect 4th, minor 7th or major 2nd, minor 7th or major 2nd. This is so sick, honestly, because it may not seem like it should, but it actually has a really strong sounding connection to the original Group 1 we see in Light's theme. Lastly, L's theme ends with Group 3 after the descending line with minor third major sixth, minor third major sixth. Okay, so that was a lot of numbers and theory and crap. So let's look at something a bit easier to see and hear. This is my DAW, or digital audio workstation, and what I've done is transpose L's theme down to the key of Light's theme, normalized their rhythms, and played them at the same time. Light's theme is in red below, and L's theme is in blue above. I'll play it and let you guys watch the notes, and then briefly talk about it. Keep in mind, I haven't changed any notes or anything, but they sound pretty good together. That's because of their shapes, which you can see in the notes. There are several times where the notes rise or fall in a similar fashion, and it's really cool because it shows how similar the themes actually are written out. Honestly, I don't know if this was all on purpose or not, but I would say that them being so similar was no accident. There's definitely a certain level of deliberation here that is just absolutely incredible. I had a hard time getting this video out and done, but honestly, this was just too cool to not talk about. Their themes are so reminiscent of each other in so many deep and interesting ways that most people would never consciously think of. It affects the listener subconsciously, and I think it was brilliant writing to connect the pieces the way that Hideki Taniguchi and Yoshihisa Hirano did. Hey guys, I'm finally back. I'm going to get back onto my release schedule that I've been trying to do kind of consistently, at least one every 10 days. This one took a little bit longer than I expected. I expected to be able to work a lot more while I was visiting family, but actually I got a message from someone about potentially doing something for, and so if that goes through, that's really cool, but I had to work for 30 straight hours to do that. So I'll keep you guys posted if I get it. As soon as I know anything that I'm allowed to talk about, I will tell you, but the videos aren't going to stop. I'm really happy with this one, actually. It was a lot of fun to make, but boy, it took a lot of rewrites. It took a lot of re-recording, so I hope you guys enjoyed it. And yeah, as always, I hope you guys have a great day and a greater life, and I will see you in the next one.